So a little bit about myself. I'm the head of Spartan Labs, which is a $100 million venture building studio that is backed by the Spartan Group. So what is Spartan Group? Spartan Group has been around for about, I would say, close to 5 years right now. And it's comprising of three main business units, right? The first one is an advisory business that we focuses on investment banking related stuff. So M&A related deals in the crypto space. And we have an investment arm within Spartan Group as well, which is a $500 million asset under management to deploy across the crypto space itself. And I think as part of the new innovation, as part of thinking about growth within Spartan Group itself, we launched Spartan Labs about 3 months ago. And the goal is really to take this $100 million that we have raised internally through our own capital to build businesses, to fund businesses that we create and incubate internally. I mean, the essence of it is really because of the fact that there's so much problem, there's so much issues, and it's still such a new industry within the Web3 space right now that we feel we could take a more methodical approach towards building and hopefully inspire more entrepreneurs in the Web3 space to start building more innovative products within the space itself. Has anyone seen this tweet by Chris Dixon before? Okay, it's a very different crowd from my usual crypto conferences. But in essence, what this tweet actually means is that, I think the whole internet has sort of transitioned over the past, I'll say, 10-15 years, right? And it started from just Web 1, which is just read-only, right? You can actually go into a website, you go into the internet, you look at what's being curated for you. Whether it's in Yahoo and stuff like that, it's just an entry point for you to look at different listings out there, right? And you sort of fast forward 10 years later, right? And you see that it sort of transitioned into like a Web 2 scenario, which is read and write, right? So there's more user-generated content, right? And UGC is something you guys are familiar with. So read and write, right? And I think it's about how do you then contribute, how do you actually write and contribute to the space itself. But at the same time, you think about this, I just had the chat earlier on, right? When you create an Instagram account, when you create and curate content as an influencer, as an organization, as a company, right? If one day Instagram and the likes of it decide to shut down its server, right? All the information, all the unique IPs, all the content that you have created for yourself, for your company, for your users will be gone from the day itself. And that's a very scary afterthought. To many, it's not possible at this point in time, but that's a reality, right? That it's possible. For whatever reasons, if a server shut down, and we have seen it happen before, I think about 6 months ago, right? When I think Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp sort of had some server shortages, right? And everyone's panicking, all the marketers of the world are panicking because why can't I put my tweet out? Why can't I put my Instagram post out? What's happening? And so that's a very scary afterthought, and that's, I think, sort of sets the premise for why, there's this whole notion of Web3, right, which is read, write, and own, right? And you are able to actually own the information, own the content, own the curated information, own the IP that you have sort of, curated or created by your team, by yourself. And that's the whole premise of it, right? It's just read, you're able to read information, get information online, you're able to contribute to information online, but more importantly, you're able to own the information online. I think that's very important in today's context. There seems to be some. Does it always happen with the second slide? Towards the second floor. Anyway, just a very quick sort of, a little bit more backstory on myself. So, like what Sarah mentioned, I started my own Web 2, journey back in, I would say, 2016. Before that, I was actually at Redma, which I think you guys are familiar with, right? And so within Redma, I sort of, helped them lead corporate development for them. Went through the entire fundraising process with the founders, through the eventual acquisition by Lazada back in 2016. And then went on to do my own startup for about 3 years. learned a ton, crashed a ton, failed a ton, but I think there was a lot of interesting insights from the Apple experience itself. Then I went on, so that was really my entry point into the whole crypto space, where I was tapped into CoinMarketCap back in 2020 to help them their own acquisition by Binance back in April. Right, we were being acquired for $400 million, and a lot of money and a lot of responsibility, and my goal was really to help figure out how do we help transform and rebuild the organization after an acquisition, which is a story for another day. But then sort of fast-forward me to from CoinMarketCap to Spartan Labs itself. And I think going back to the topic, right, decoding the market trends in Web3 at this point, today's market climate is obviously a lot more bearish, right? I think, I'm not sure how caught up you guys are with the whole incident with Luna and the crashes in the markets at this point, but it's a very bearish sentiment at this point. There's a lot less investor activity, right? It's a lot more cautious. And I think that don't only apply to the Web3 space. I think like what Roshni mentioned, I think even in the private markets for traditional tech startup, fundings are drying up. Everyone's thinking about profit. Everyone's thinking about sustainability at this point in time. So it's a lot more cautious. But I think what we noticed in the past 6 to 12 months is there's a lot more builders, a lot more strong operators who understands the playbook of Web2 coming to build in Web3. I think that's really the exciting part, right? There's a lot more smart capital, a lot more smart people coming in to build projects and create new innovations within the space itself. So we do see a lot of new projects forming, asking questions around why are things not being done in a certain way, right? Why are the fintechs of the world not building the right infrastructure for the crypto space? But we do see that now that we have a lot more, I would say, strong and credible Web2 operators who have built the best fintechs of the world, who have built the best payment gateways of the world, who have built the best marketplaces of the world, coming into Web3 right now because they're excited about the whole ownership element of it, right? They're coming to build new projects, and I'm very bullish on the fact that I think there's a lot more utility, a lot more excitement, a lot more innovation that will come out of blockchain in the next coming years, right? And just to maybe share a bit about my experience in Web3, I think having sort of been through the entire journey of building I would say a traditional or a Web2 company to Web3 right now, and even back in my banking days when I first started my career, there's a lot of relevance in terms of how we look at the financial industry, the financial sector, and how do we take a more decentralized approach towards building in Web3, right? And so I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot more possibilities, right? Think of any sort of, user experience at this point in time, whether it's a payment platform, whether it's a marketplace platform. How do we sort of take out the intermediary? How do we sort of return the value back to our users and let our users actually own the data? There's a lot more use cases that come out of, what I call DeFi. I know there's a lot of acronyms here and stuff that you guys may not be aware of, but DeFi just means decentralized finance. NFT just means non-fungible tokens, which are basically, lack of a better word, the current sort of finance is more like your profile pics and stuff, and gaming, for example. So I think there's a lot of innovation. The space is moving very quickly. I think it's just very exciting to be chatting with these people every single day and understanding what kind of new innovations can come out of Web3 at this point in time. So I think going back to what we just saying, right? So crypto, NFT, and metaverses, what's the limit? What's what lies ahead? The truth is no one knows what's going to happen in the next 5, 10 years, right? But everyone is just pushing the boundaries at this point. I think as cliche as it sounds, we are still in the very early days of building in Web3, right? What does it actually mean to build in Web3? And that's the whole essence of why we started a venture studio model as well. Instead of just investing through our own capital into projects, we have so much more insights of what's happening within the space. Why not take on that proactive approach of actually just building the space itself? So you think about this, right now, like I mentioned, NFTs are primarily your profile pics, right? If you look at Bored Ape, for example, not sure how many guys own a Bored Ape, but it started from about $800 for one of this profile pic. Now you can sell it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So obviously there's a lot of speculation involved, but it's sort of evolving from just a pure digital asset where you look at it and it looks nice and it looks like a profile pic for you even going into like exclusive access to events and stuff, right? You talk about Nike, the Nikes of the world going to NFTs just because they want to get on board that train and allow their communities to engage with them directly when they own a digital asset that's curated and created by Nike. But this is not owned by Nike, it's actually owned by the users who bought the NFT itself. So I think maybe going back to something that's perhaps a bit more relevant to organizations these days when you think about growth, right? And I think this is actually a very meaningful conversation to have for the market leaders of the world, right? Because when you are in a market leading position, your job is not to look at your competitors and say, how do I optimize and do slightly better than them? Your job as market leaders is to really figure out the next phase of growth, right? How do I think about growth from a new frontier perspective? How do I innovate and expand and attract the adjacent users to come into my platform versus just always looking at competitors and say, how do I make sure I win them and make sure that their market share is always 30% and not 40% and stuff. The goal really is to how do you expand the pie and understand how do you build a better business, how do you attract adjacent users to come in. So I think to me, it's not so much about a transition from Web 2 to Web 3. Right? It's not so much of like, okay, I'm a Web 2 company now, my job is to go into Web 3. Right? The goal is really to understand the pros and cons of each of these individual, I'll say distinction of the technology itself, right? I think Web 3 can be used as a tool, right, to expand a company's existing business model to new lines of business. You look at Nike, again, back to Nike as an example. They are already a market leader in the apparel and the sports industry itself. How do you actually get them to expand to new lines of business? And they have done it really well, for Nike, the likes of Adidas, the likes of Nike, even Facebook, which is now rebranded Meta, for example. They are already a market leader in Web 2 social media. What's next for them, right? And then they are taking that proactive approach of like, okay, let's go into the metaverse. Let's just build crypto payments. Let's build the infrastructures that enable crypto payments. Let's go into digital wallets. So I think it's really about going down that route and understanding, not really just transitioning or transforming your company from Web 2 to Web 3, but actually incorporating elements that actually make sense for your business and go into this, and expand your business to new lines of products. Obviously, it doesn't come with this. Obviously, I think when you talk about the transition from Web 2 or like incorporating elements of Web 3, there are challenges ahead, right? How fast the industry is moving. We are constantly breaking, and this sort of reminds me of back in the days when Facebook was in its earlier days, right? The ethos of Facebook is always to break things and move fast, right? Now it's sort of transition a bit to break things, move fast in a responsible manner or something along that line. But again, it can be applied to the Web 3 space at this point because new innovations are happening every single day as we speak. Right, so how do we make sure that as the space is moving, as growth operators, and we can sort of incorporate the fast pace of innovation that's happening and the potential backlash from existing customers. So there's a lot more communication that needs to happen. There's a lot more thought process that needs to happen, a lot more planning that needs to happen before you actually make that sort of incorporation of new business units. But I think that's the point where if you don't do it, and as market leaders, if you don't do it, no one else is going to follow. No one else will sort of be in that position to do it because everyone's placing their rat race or catching up to their competitors at this point. So I think that's where we have to move on as an industry together. And so how do you sort of think about this, right? I think from a solution perspective, just being immersed in a space, working with very experienced operators who understand the space, and how do you then incorporate or work with them and collaborate with them to expand to new verticals. Yeah, so I think the goal of maybe this slide is really just to share the point that when you think about building a product or when you think about expanding to a new vertical, it's really about understanding your customer. So going back to first principle again, right? Like Roshni mentioned, I think product is always product, customer, people. It's always the same regardless of whether you're building in Web 3 or you're building in Web 2, right? I think the goal is really to understand the customer, understand the purpose, right? Why do you want to make the shift, right? Is there a certain business model that is failing in your current business itself that you feel like it makes sense for us to expand into Web 3? You need to understand the purpose behind the shift, right? And through that itself, you can then, we can collaboratively devise a strategy or work out a way to transition smoothly and efficiently. And it's always about communicating these challenges to people. Yeah, I think the last slide is really just more, a slide about what we are doing and where we're headed. As mentioned, I think we are a $100 million venture building studio. We think that the space is still really early, still really young. So what we want to do is just be building and funding Web3 companies on our end versus just deploying capital onto the entrepreneurs of the world, and we build that infrastructure together with them. So our goal is really to invent, validate, build, and scale Web3 startups to accelerate projects from ideation to